My name is Aria Thorne, or at least it was. The name feels like a borrowed coat now, one that no longer fits across the shoulders. I'm 32 years old, and until recently, I was a therapist specializing in attachment theory and mindfulness, living a life that, from the outside, looked like a carefully tended garden. My practice, a quiet, sunlit space in a restored brick building in Port Blossom, was my sanctuary. I helped people navigate the messy landscapes of their hearts, guiding them toward healthier connections, all while believing my own was a fortress built on solid ground. My husband, Owen, was the architect of that life, both literally and figuratively, an actual architect. He designed the home we lived in, a modern craftsman nestled amongst Douglas firs, with windows so large they seemed to dissolve the barrier between inside and out. He was a kind, steady man with eyes the color of the Oregon coast on a cloudy day and a quiet strength. That had always been my anchor. We'd been married for 6 years, together for 9, a seamless unfolding of time that felt both comfortable and, if I'm being honest, deeply predictable. Our days were measured in shared pots of coffee on the cedar deck, the rustle of his blueprints on the dining table, and the gentle rhythm of a love that had settled from a bonfire into a warm, constant hearth. We had no children yet, a deliberate choice. We were building our foundation, Owen would say, ensuring every joist and beam was perfect before adding new roofs. Next year, we'd decided, next year, we would start our family. But foundations, I've learned, can be compromised by the smallest, most insidious cracks. Mine began to show it months ago. On a rain-slicked Tuesday evening, I was with my 3 closest friends, Nina, Sophie, and Tess, a little constellation since graduate school. We were huddled in a cozy corner of a wine bar downtown, the scent of Pinot Noir and damp wood filling the air. We were all in the same chapter of our lives, married, professionally successful, living in tastefully renovated homes, and all nursing a vague, unspoken sense of discontent. Is this it? Nina murmured, swirling the deep red in her glass. She was a brilliant litigator, fierce in the courtroom, but in these moments, her vulnerability was palpable. We work, we come home, we talk about renovations, we plan a trip for 6 months from now. It's all just so scheduled. We all nodded. The conversation drifted, as it often did, to the post of the wild, untethered versions of ourselves we'd been in our early 20s. I found myself talking about Kai. He was a memory from my senior year of college, a whirlwind of exhilarating recklessness. Kai was a rock climber, a musician, a man who lived in a perpetual state of motion. He was magnificent in the way a summer storm is magnificent boreal, thrilling, and utterly unsustainable. He was the kind of man you experienced, not the kind you built a life with. God, do you ever miss that feeling? Sophie asked, leaning forward, her eyes bright. Not him, necessarily, but the chaos, the feeling that anything could happen. Just for a night, a collective, wistful sigh went around the table. We admitted we did. We missed the sharp, electric thrill of the unknown, the pure physicality of desire untangled from domesticity, from shared bank accounts and discussions about whose turn it was to take out the recycling. Then Tessa, ever the pragmatist, posed the question that would become our undoing. Her voice was a low whisper, a conspiratorial breath. What if we could have a little piece of that back? Just a taste, safely. The idea hung in the air, potent and terrifying. Kai, I knew from the digital ether of social media, was still in Port Blossom. He ran a boutique climbing gym and led holistic fitness retreats. He was still single, still chasing storms. I pulled up his profile on my phone, a curated collection of photos of him scaling sheer rock faces, his smile as untamed as ever. What started as a drunken fantasy solidified over encrypted texts and hushed phone calls. We created a framework, a set of rules we believed would protect us. We called ourselves the Briar Rose Society, a name that sounded both elegant and impenetrable. Kai would be our shared secret. One Thursday a month, on a rotating basis, one of us would meet him. We would be each other's alibis: a late work dinner, a book club meeting, a yoga class. We were meticulous, deleting every message, using cache, covering every track. As a therapist, I convinced myself on them that this was an exercise in radical self-care, in compartmentalization. I spoke of boundaries and of honoring the multifaceted nature of the self. The hypocrisy is a physical weight in my chest now, a constant, the ache. My first time meeting him, my heart hammered against my ribs with a force that was equal parts terror and exhilaration. I told Owen I was attending a seminar on somatic therapy across town. He kissed my forehead, told me to drive safe, and reminded me there was leftover curry in the fridge. As I drove away, I saw him through the rearview mirror, standing in the warm glow of the doorway of the house he built for us, and a wave of guilt so profound it almost made me turn back washed over me. But the pull of the forbidden, of the woman I used to be, was stronger. The guilt, I'm ashamed to say, faded quickly, replaced by the intoxicating thrill of our secret. We grew bolder. The arrangement expanded from clandestine meetings in dimly lit bars to weekend hikes on the less traveled trails that spiderweb through the forests surrounding Port Blossom. We'd go as a group, 4 married women and 1 magnetic man, laughing as we walked beneath the canopy of ancient pines. We'd find a secluded spot, and while one of us slipped away with Kai into the dense ferns, the other 3 would stand watch, our nervous laughter echoing in the quiet woods. It was reckless, foolish, and it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. It made me feel seen, not as a wife or a therapist, but as a woman with a wild, untamable core. Last Saturday was supposed to be my turn. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. I told Owen I needed a solo hike, some time to clear my head and reconnect with nature. It was a familiar excuse, part of the self-care narrative I'd so carefully constructed. He smiled, handed me my water bottle, and kissed me goodbye, enjoyed the quiet. He said, I'll be catching up on some renderings at the studio. I met Kai and Nina at the trailhead of Whispering Pines. The others were meeting us later for the group part of our hike. About a mile in, we veered off the main path, following a barely there trail deeper into the woods. The air was thick with the scent of dampers and cedar. In a small clearing, dappled with sunlight, Kai pulled me close. I was pressed against the rough bark of a towering fir, his hand sliding under my shirt, the world narrowing to the beat of my own blood in my ears. When I heard the sharp crack of a twig breaking nearby, I pulled back, assuming it was Sophie or Tess arriving early. But it wasn't. It was Owen. He stood 20 feet away, perfectly still, holding his phone up. He wasn't yelling, wasn't crying. His face, the face I knew better than my own, was a mask of calm, quiet devastation. He was simply recording, documenting the demolition of our life as if he were observing a structural failure in a building. My mind fractured. I scrambled to pull my shirt down, a stream of nonsensical apologies tumbling from my lips. Kai stepped back, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Nina, her face pale with shock, turned and fled back towards the trail. But Owen's focus was entirely on me. He didn't say a word, just kept the phone trained on my face as I fumbled with my clothes. My pleas choked by sobs, mascara running in hot tracks down my cheeks. Finally, when the silence became unbearable, he lowered the phone and spoke. His voice was unnervingly steady, devoid of all emotion. I think we have everything we need, Aria. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps sure and even on the uneven ground. I ran after him, my hiking boots unlaced, stumbling over roots and rocks. I reached the parking lot just as he was getting into his Audi. I pounded on the window, begging him to talk to me, to scream at me, to do anything but this cold, surgical excision. He didn't even look at me. I saw his phone on the passenger seat, a map open, a small blue dot pulsing right where we were standing. He had used our shared location app. He had known. He had followed me. He started the car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in a cloud of dust and the ruins of everything I once held sacred. That was 12 days ago. In those 12 days, the life Owen and I built has been systematically dismantled with the same precision he uses to design a building. He didn't need to be loud. His actions were deafening. He hired an IT specialist who unearthed our entire digital history. The deleted Briar Rose Society chats, the hotel receipts I thought were cleverly buried, the photos. He'd also hired a private investigator weeks ago, compiling a quiet, thorough portfolio of our betrayal. He had dates, times, footage of us entering Kai's apartment building, and then he sent it all in a single, coordinated act of quiet devastation. He emailed a comprehensive file to Nina's husband, Sophie's husband, and Tess's husband. Simultaneously, the fallout was immediate and catastrophic. He had already consulted with his lawyer, moving the majority of his assets, our shared assets, in 2 protected accounts before I was even served. He canceled my credit cards and had the locks on our home his home. The deed was solely in his name changed the same afternoon he caught me. Divorce papers were delivered to me at my practice, handed to me by a courier in the waiting room, in front of 2 colleagues and a client. The Hawthorne Wellness Collective, the practice I'd helped build, fired me 3 days later. My contract had a clear ethics clause about conduct unbecoming of a therapist, and orchestrating a multi-person affair certainly qualified. The state licensing board has opened an investigation. My friends are no longer my friends. We are 4 women adrift in separate lifeboats, blaming each other for the storm we created together. Nina's husband threw her out of their historic home. She is staying with her sister, facing a brutal divorce from the very man who taught her how to be a ruthless litigator. Sophie and her husband are in a vicious custody battle over their 2 young children. Tess's marriage, which had seemed the most fragile to begin with, simply evaporated overnight. We are players, the subjects of hushed gossip in the coffee shops and yoga studios of Port Blossom. Kai vanished. After receiving cease and desist letters from 4 different attorneys, he deleted his social media, disconnected his phone, and I heard through the grapevine, moved back to Colorado to live with his parents. I am 32 years old, sleeping in my childhood bedroom in my parents' house 20 miles outside the city. The floral wallpaper I chose when I was 16 is peeling at the corners. The air smells of dust and my mother's quiet disappointment. I spend my days applying for administrative assistant jobs. For any position that doesn't require a background check or a license in good standing. Owen, my husband, me soon-to-be ex-husband, is already seeing someone new. Her name is Hannah. She is a landscape architect he met through a project months ago. Friends who are still speaking to me say they are perfect together. Her social media is filled with pictures of them hiking on different, happier trails and working in the garden of a new property he's just bought. He looks lighter, relieved, as if I were a burden he was finally able to set down. My parents struggled to look me in the eye. My father, who gripped Owen's hand at our wedding and welcomed him as the son he never had, speaks to me only in clipped, necessary phrases. My mother moves through the house like a ghost, and sometimes, late at night, I hear her crying in the kitchen. I destroyed it all. I took a life of warmth and substance and traded it for a cheap, fleeting thrill. I craved a spark, and instead, I burned my entire world to the ground. The most bitter irony is that I, the therapist who preached the gospel of communication and trust, knew better. I saw firsthand the wreckage infidelity leaves behind. I knew the risks with clinical clarity, and I walked into the fire anyway, blinded by an arrogant belief that I was too self-aware, too clever to get burned. I keep replaying that moment in the woods. The look on Owen's face wasn't anger or hatred. It was something far worse. It was recognition. The moment he saw me not as his wife, but as a stranger he had tragically misjudged. In that instant, our 9 years together didn't just break. They ceased to exist. He looked at me, and I was nothing. I did this. I am the architect of my own ruin. And now, I must learn to live in it. Writing this out feels like lancing a wound, a painful but necessary release. The days that followed my exile from our home were a blur of sterile, procedural cruelty. When I finally drove from the trailhead to the house on the hill, a locksmith's van was already parked in the driveway. Owen stood on the porch, flanked not by police officers, but by two large, stoic movers. He had already packed several suitcases with my clothes, my books, my toiletries. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for a nominal a month's legal minimum for temporary support, and the address of a storage unit where the rest of my personal effects would be delivered. I tried to speak, to plead, but my voice was a useless croak. I tried to step past him, to get inside the house, our house, but he simply held up a hand, a quiet, immovable barrier. It's better this way, Arya, he said, his voice level. It was the first time he'd spoken to me directly since the woods, and the calmness of it was more chilling than any rage. I watched as the movers loaded my life into my small sedan, and then he went back inside and closed the door. The solid click of the lock echoing the final closing of a chapter. The divorce proceedings were, like Owen himself, efficient and clinical. The paper cited irreconcilable differences. There was no battle over assets. He wasn't trying to punish me financially. He didn't have to. He was simply extracting me from his life. I would keep my car, the retirement account from my former job, and the contents of the storage unit. He would keep the house, his practice, and his future. The legal term used to justify the swift, clean division was moral turpitude. My affair had dissolved my claim to the life we had built. The other husbands were not so surgical. Nina's husband, Alex, a man who prided himself on his family's standing in the community, systematically dismantled her reputation. He sent a carefully worded email to her firm's partners, her parents, and the board of the charity she sat on, detailing the affair. Sophie's husband, Ben, went public, posting a furious, grief-stricken screed on social media, complete with screenshots of the Briar Rose Society group chat. The post was deleted within hours, but the damage was done. Tess's husband, it turned out, had been having his own affair for the better part of a year. Theirs was a quiet, mutual annihilation, a house of cards collapsing in on itself. The group chat became our digital undoing. We had been so careless, so giddy with our own audacity. We complained about our husbands. We joked about our deceptions. We critiqued Kai's performance. Every word was now evidence in 3 separate divorce cases. A joke Sophie had made about crushing a sleeping pill into Ben's tea so she could sneak out was presented in family court as a premeditated plan, and it cost her dearly. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned the full extent of Owen's quiet diligence. He had grown suspicious months ago, not because of any grand mistake, but because of 1,000 tiny shifts in the atmosphere of our marriage. I was more protective of my phone. I came home from my solo hikes smelling of unfamiliar soap, my hair damp. I was distant, wrapped in a secret energy he couldn't access. He never confronted me. Instead, he prepared. He spoke to a lawyer. He started therapy for himself to process what he suspected. He separated his personal finances from his business. He was building a firewall while I was gleefully lighting matches. The hike, I realized with a sickening lurch, had been a trap. That morning, he'd casually suggested we go to Whispering Pines together. I'd stammered, making excuses about needing solitude. He watched the panic flicker in my eyes, and in that moment, he knew. He wasn't tracking my phone to catch me. He was tracking it to confirm what he already knew in his heart. And Hannah, the landscape architect, they hadn't just met. They'd been working on a community garden project together for months. By all accounts, their relationship had been entirely professional while Owen and I were together. She was just there, a kind, creative, grounded woman who saw him, who listened to him talk about his passions and his fears. The day he asked me to leave our home, once the legal separation was in effect, he called her and asked her to dinner. She said yes. I saw them last week at the Saturday farmers market. I was huddled under an awning, buying bruised apples because they were half price. They were at a stall selling local honey, laughing about something on his phone. Hannah was wearing a hand-knit sweater and boots caked with honest dirt. She looked vibrant and real. Owen looked at her with an open, unguarded affection I hadn't seen on his face in years. He glanced up and his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. There was no anger, not even pity. It was worse. It was the polite, distant recognition you'd give a former colleague you barely knew. I was a ghost from a past life he had already shed. My own therapist's irony is not lost on May says, I am grieving a multitude of losses, my husband, my career, my home, my friendships, and most profoundly, my identity. I used to be Aria Thorne, MA, LMFT, a respected professional, a wife, a homeowner. Now, I'm just Aria, the woman who lives with her parents. The cautionary tale whispered at dinner parties. My mother asked me, her voice trembling, if it was worth it. How do you explain that in the moment? It felt like everything. It felt like reclaiming a piece of my youth I thought was gone forever. It felt like a rebellion against the quiet predictability of adult life. It was the thrill of a secret text message that said, thinking of you, instead of, did you remember to buy milk? Now, it feels like nothing. It feels like setting your own house on fire because you felt a momentary chill. The loneliness is a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothers me at night. I used to be in constant communication with at least 4 people. Now, my phone is silent for hours at a time. I still wake in the morning and reach for Owen's side of the bed. The phantom warmth of his body a cruel memory. The habits of 9 years are etched into my nervous system, and my body hasn't yet accepted that the life it knew is over. I am the villain of my own story. I see that with perfect, painful clarity, not the tragic heroine who made a mistake, but the person who chose, day after day for 8 months, to cause intentional harm. And villains don't get gentle endings. This will likely be the last time I write about this. There is a strange, quiet finality settling over things now, like dust on abandoned furniture. The state board officially suspended my license last week. The hearing was a humiliating ordeal. They presented emails I'd sent from my work account to coordinate with Kai, and screenshots from our group chat where I'd frequently used therapeutic jargon to describe how I was managing Owen's suspicions. It was a portrait of a professional in complete ethical collapse. Then came the deposition for our divorce. I had to sit in a sterile conference room across a polished table from Owen while his lawyer, a woman with a kind face and merciless questions, walked me through the entire affair. Dates, locations, the specific lies I told. Owen sat beside her, calm and composed, taking notes on a legal pad. He never looked at me, not once. After 2 hours of relentless, detailed questioning, I finally broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, begging him to look at me, telling him how sorry I was, that I would do anything to go back. He finally lifted his head. His eyes, clear and steady, met mine. "You are not sorry you did it, Aria," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "You are just sorry you got caught." He was right. In that moment, he saw me more clearly than I had ever seen myself. The sorrow I felt then was for my own situation, for the consequences that had rained down upon me. The true, so deep remorse for the pain I caused him that came later, in the long, silent nights in my childhood bed. The financial reality is a daily, grinding humiliation. My student loan debt is substantial. My car, which one had encouraged me to buy because I deserved something nice, is now a luxury I can't afford. I started a job last week, working part-time at an upscale home goods store in a nearby town. I spend my days folding artisanal linen napkins and explaining the benefits of French milled soap to women who live the life I so carelessly threw away. My manager is a bright, ambitious 24-year-old. She is patient with me, but I see the confusion in her eyes when I struggle with the point-of-sale system. She doesn't know I have a master's degree. She doesn't know I used to have a life that shone. My dad and I had a real conversation last night, the first since this all happened. We sat on the back porch, the one he built himself 30 years ago. He told me he wasn't angry anymore, just deeply, profoundly sad. "I thought we raised you to value kindness above all else," he said, his gaze fixed on the darkening garden. "What you did to Owen, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure of character. He was a good man. He was family. He told me he loved me because that's what a father does, but that he didn't recognize the person I'd become." His quiet disappointment was 1,000 times more painful than any shouting match could have been. I am learning to live with the silence in my phone, the silence in my career, the silence in the car on the way to a job that doesn't use any part of my mind or my heart. But the loudest silence is the one that Owen left behind. The absence of his laughter, his quiet presence in a room, his text messages about a funny dog he saw on his walk to the studio. I ran into them again, not a fleeting glance at the market, but a direct, unavoidable encounter. He and Hannah came into the store where I work. They were looking for a wedding gift for a friend. I saw them from behind the cash wrap, my heart seizing in my chest. They moved through the aisles with an easy, comfortable intimacy, their hands brushing, their heads bent close together as they discussed a set of ceramic bowls. My manager asked me to help them. I walked toward them on legs that felt like they were made of glass. "Can I help you find anything?" I asked, my voice thin and strange. Owen looked up, and for a long moment, there was a flicker of something in his eye. Shock, pain, a ghost of the past. Hannah looked from him to me, a question on her face. "We are all set. Thank you," he said, his voice gentle but firm, creating an immediate and unbreakable boundary. He put a hand on Hannah's back and guided her toward another aisle, away from me. I stood there, rooted to the spot, surrounded by beautiful, useless things. They bought the bowls. I had to ring them up at the counter. My hands shook as I wrapped the gift. Our fingers brushed as he handed me his credit card. A jolt, like static electricity, passed between us. A final, phantom spark from a dead socket. "Congratulations," I managed to whisper, not sure if I was talking about their friend's wedding or the new life he was so clearly building. "Thank you, Aria," he said, using my name with a quiet formality. "I wish you well." And that was it. Not anger, not drama, just a quiet, dignified closing of the final door. He wished me well, the way you would a stranger. They left, the little bell on the door chiming their departure. I watched them walk down the street, hand in hand, swallowed up by the afternoon sun. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't cold and calculating. He was a good man who had been deeply wounded and who was now, with quiet strength, rebuilding his life with someone who valued it. He was moving forward, and I realized that, in my own way, I must too. My grieving isn't for him anymore. Not really. That bridge is ash. I am grieving for the woman I could have been, the future I murdered for a cheap thrill. My therapist says healing is not about returning to who you were before the trauma, but about integrating the experience and becoming someone new. I don't know who I am becoming yet. She is a stranger to me. I go on hikes now by myself. I walk the same wooded trails, but they feel different. I am not seeking a thrill or an escape. I am just walking. I am feeling the damp Oregon air on my face, listening to the chatter of the squirrels, and noticing the way the light filters through the canopy. I am learning to sit in the quiet, to face the uncomfortable truth about myself without flinching. I shattered my life into 1,000 pieces, and now I am slowly, painstakingly beginning to pick them up. I don't know what I will build with them. It will not be the beautiful, perfect house one designed. It will be something smaller, more flawed, but it will be my own. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like it might just be enough. This isn't a story about a villain getting her comeuppance. It is a story about a woman who lost her way and is now, in the devastating quiet of the aftermath, trying to find the path home to herself.